guy let a crying girl inside. Huge mistake. The police report calls it a kidnapping attempt. They use sterile clinical words like abduction, human trafficking, and premeditated entrapment. But those words are too clean. They don't capture the texture of the carpet against my cheek, the smell of industrial bleach masking the copper scent of old blood, or the way the silence in the Mojave Desert feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on your eardrums. They say the girl, Jessica, was 19. But the thing I saw through the peephole that night, the thing that wore Jessica's face like a mask that didn't quite fit, wasn't 19. It was ancient. It was the kind of hunger that has existed since the first time a human built a fire to keep the dark at bay. I survived because I ran. But sometimes late at night when the wind rattles the window frame of my apartment in Seattle, I wonder if I actually got away or if I'm just on a very long leash. It started with a violation of the first rule of urban exploration: never get stranded in the transition zones. I'm a photographer, the kind who chases decay. I document what the internet calls liminal spaces, abandoned malls, empty school hallways at night, places that exist only to be passed through, never inhabited. Nevada is the capital of liminality. It is a state of ghost towns and roads that stretch into infinity, dissolving into heat haze. I'd spent the last 3 days shooting the skeletal remains of gold rush towns near Ely, capturing the way dry rot eats through Victorian wood. My Honda Civic, a 2014 model that I had affectionately named the Roach for its refusal to die, was packed with camera gear, tripods, and empty Red Bull cans. I was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes your eyes burn and your thoughts drift into dream logic while you're still awake. I was aiming for a Motel 6 in Tonopah, about 80 miles west. It was 1:45 a.m. The highway Route 76 was a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through a void so absolute it felt like driving through deep space. There were no stars, just a heavy cloud cover that trapped the day's heat against the valley floor. Then the needle on my temperature gauge spiked. It didn't creep up. It jumped, burying itself in the red. A second later, the smell hit me, the sweet chemical, sickly scent of burning coolant. Steam began to hiss from under the hood, a white geyser illuminated by my headlights blinding me. No, not here. Please, not here, I whispered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I eased off the gas, praying for a shoulder, a turnout, anything. The engine sputtered, a dying cough that shuddered through the chassis. I lost power steering. I muscled the car to the right, coasting on momentum. That's when I saw it. It wasn't salvation. It was a neon sign flickering with the erratic rhythm of a dying heart. Sunset Motel. The S and the T were burnt out, leaving it to read UNE Motel. The sign was perched atop a rusted steel pole that looked like it hadn't been painted since the Nixon administration. Below it, a single arrow pointed toward a gravel driveway. I didn't have a choice. Gravity and momentum made the decision for me. I turned the wheel, the tires crunching loudly as I rolled off the smooth highway and onto the cracked pavement of the parking lot. The Honda groaned one last time and died completely before I even put it in park. Silence rushed in to fill the space where the engine noise had been. It was sudden and violent. I sat there for a moment listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling metal, my breathing sounding ragged and loud in the confined space. I checked my phone. 3% battery. No signal, of course. I looked out at the structure. The motel was an L-shaped single-story block typical of the mid-century roadside architecture that dots the American West. It was painted appealing, sun-bleached beige that probably looked yellow in the daylight. The doors were painted a dark, bruised purple. It looked like the set of a horror movie that had run out of budget halfway through production. There was only one other car in the lot, a dust-covered pickup truck parked near the office. No other guests, just me and the desert. I grabbed my camera bag. Not the big equipment case, just my shoulder bag with my DSLR and the essentials. I never leave the expensive glass in the car. Stepping out, the heat hit me like a physical blow. It was dry, dusty, and smelled of sagebrush and ozone. The only light came from the office window at the corner of the L shape, casting a sickly yellow rectangle onto the concrete. I walked toward the office. The gravel crunched under my boots, sounding impossibly loud like gunshots in a library. I felt exposed. My skin prickled the little hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the geometry of the place. The way the shadows stretched away from the single floodlight seemed wrong, elongated, pointing toward the desert, like accusatory fingers. The office door had a bell that chimed with a dull, flat note when I pushed it open. The lobby was a time capsule of bad taste. Wood-paneled walls, a linoleum floor patterned to look like marble, but peeling at the corners to reveal black adhesive, and a smell that made my stomach turn stale cigarette smoke, pine-scented cleaner, and something else underneath, something musky and damp. Behind the counter sat a man. He didn't look up immediately. He was watching a small portable TV that was broadcasting static-filled black and white images. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, with thinning hair slicked back with something that looked more like motor oil than gel. He wore a short-sleeved button-up shirt that was yellowing at the armpits. "Hi," I said. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again, projecting the confidence I didn't feel. "Hi, my car overheated. I need a room for the night." The man turned his head slowly. His neck moved with a stiffness that suggested arthritic pain or supreme laziness. When his eyes met mine, I felt a sudden, irrational urge to turn around and run back to the broken car. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites mapped with red veins, but the irises were a pale, watery blue. They didn't scan my face. They dismantled it. He looked at my forehead, my chin, my throat, my chest, then back to my eyes. It wasn't sexual. It was inventory. He was counting my parts. "Vacancy," he said. His voice was like gravel in a blender, wet and grinding. "We got plenty of vacancy." "Just one night," I said, placing my credit card on the counter. "And do you have a landline I could use? My cell is dead." He looked at the credit card, then at me. He smiled, revealing teeth that were stained brown near the gums. "Line's down." "Windstorm took out the poles north of here 2 days ago. Repair crew ain't come out yet?" Logic told me this was plausible. The desert eats infrastructure. But my gut twisted. "Okay, just the room then." He didn't take the card. "Cash is better. Machine acts up." I had $40 in emergency cash tucked in my phone case. "I have 40. "That'll do." He opened a drawer and pulled out a physical registration card. No computer. He slapped it on the counter along with a cheap ballpoint pen. Name, license plate, make, and model. I filled it out, my handwriting shaky. Morgan Cade, Honda Civic. I hesitated at the address, writing down an old P.O., box I hadn't used in years. "Never give a predator a map to your cave." He took the cash, his fingers brushing against my palm. His skin was cold. Not cool, but cold, like he had been holding a bag of ice. He reached behind him to a pegboard on the wall. There were dozens of keys, but he bypassed the ones for the front rooms. He reached for a key hanging on the far right near the edge of the board. "Room 237 inches, he said, slapping the key onto the formica. It was attached to a heavy, diamond-shaped green plastic tag. "Upstairs, end of the hall. Quietest room we got. Best view of the sunset if you stay that long." "It's 2:00 a.m., I said, taking the key. "I don't think I'll be seeing the sunset." He chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. "You never know. Time moves different out here, missy." I grabbed the key and turned to leave. "Ice machine is broken," he called out to my back. "Vending machine takes quarters only. And don't mind the coyotes. They sound like screaming babies sometimes, but they're just dogs." I froze for a second, my hand on the door handle. "Thanks," I muttered, and stepped back out into the heat. The walk to room 237 felt like a gauntlet. The motel had an external corridor on the second floor. I climbed the rusted metal stairs, the structure groaning under my weight. From the balcony, I could see the vast expanse of the desert. It was a sea of ink. There were no lights on the horizon, no distant farmhouses, no other cars on the highway. I was completely alone in a black void tethered to reality only by the flickering neon buzzing below. I walked past room 230, 231, 232. All the curtains were drawn tight. The windows were dark, coated in a layer of grime that turned them into opaque mirrors reflecting my own anxious silhouette. As I passed room 235, I thought I heard a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping like someone hitting a mattress with a heavy stick. I paused, holding my breath. The sound stopped instantly. "Just the wind," I whispered. "Just the pipes." I reached the end of the walkway. Room 237. It was isolated from the rest, separated by a utility closet. The location was perfect for privacy or for ensuring no one heard you scream. I chided myself for the melodramatic thought. "Stop it, Morgan. You're a professional. You've slept in abandoned asylums. This is just a motel." The key stuck in the lock. I had to jiggle it, pulling it back a fraction of an inch before it turned with a stiff clack. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It was the same industrial cleaner smell from the lobby, but concentrated, mixed with the musty odor of old carpet and stale tobacco. It smelled like a hospital waiting room where someone had been chain-smoking. I flipped the light switch. The fluorescent tube on the ceiling flickered, buzzed angrily, and then washed the room in a sickly greenish-white pallor. The room was hideous. The carpet was a swirling pattern of browns and oranges stained in patches that looked suspiciously dark. The bedspread was a floral nightmare that had probably been fashionable in 1978. There was a cheap wooden desk, a CRT television bolted to the dresser, and a large mirror opposite the bed. I stepped inside and let the door swing shut. The lock clicked, but it didn't sound secure. I immediately engaged the deadbolt. It slid home with a reassuring thud, then the chain lock. I tested it. The screws looked a bit loose in the wood, as if someone had yanked on it once before. I dropped my camera bag on the desk and did my sweep. This was my ritual. Whenever I stayed in a sketchy place, I checked for cameras. I used the flashlight on my phone to scan the smoke detector, the alarm clock, the vents. Nothing. I checked the mirror using the fingernail test. Place your fingernail against the glass. If there's a gap between your nail and the reflection, it's a real mirror. If they touch, it's two-way. There was a gap. Real mirror. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was hard sagging in the middle like a hammock. I pulled out my phone. Still no service. 2% battery. I rummaged through my bag for my portable charger, plugged it in, and watched the lightning bolt icon appear. A small victory. I needed to wash the desert off my face. I went into the bathroom. The tiles were cracked, grout lines black with mold. I turned on the faucet. The pipes groaned, shuddered, and spat out brown water for 5 seconds before running clear. I splashed water on my face, the coolness shocking my system. As I dried my face with one of the scratchy, thin, white towels, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked like a ghost. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale despite the Nevada sun, blonde hair matted with sweat. "You're okay," I told my reflection. "Tow truck in the morning, back to civilization by noon." I walked back into the bedroom and froze. The curtains. I hadn't checked the window. The heavy drapes were pulled shut, but there was a gap of about 2 inches in the middle. Beyond the glass, the balcony walkway was dark. I walked over to close them properly. As I reached for the fabric, I looked down into the parking lot. The clerk, Ray, was outside. He wasn't in the office. He was standing in the middle of the gravel lot, directly under the flickering neon sign. He wasn't looking at the road. He wasn't looking at my car. He was looking up. Specifically, he was looking directly at my window. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, head tilted back at an unnatural angle. The distance was too far to see his eyes clearly, but I could feel them. It was a sensation of physical pressure, like a thumb pressing into the center of my forehead. He knew I was watching. I yanked the curtain shut, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Creep," I hissed. I grabbed a heavy desk chair and dragged it over to the door, wedging the back of it under the door handle. It was an old trick, but it made me feel better. If anyone tried to open the door, the chair would grind against the floor and jam it shut. I sat on the bed back against the headboard, knees pulled up to my chest. I couldn't sleep. Not yet. I grabbed my camera. I started reviewing the photos from earlier in the day, trying to distract myself with composition and exposure settings. The ghost towns, the rusted gas pumps, the empty shacks. Picture 104, an old saloon door hanging off its hinges. Picture 105, a child's doll left in the dirt, half melted by the sun. Picture 106, a wide shot of the desert at dusk. I stopped at picture 106. I zoomed in on the horizon. In the far distance, blurred by the heat shimmer, was a shape. It looked like a truck, a black pickup truck, parked on a ridge facing the town I was exploring. I scrolled back to picture 98, taken an hour earlier at a different location. I zoomed in on the background. There it was again, a black speck on the hill. My stomach dropped. It wasn't paranoia if they were actually following you. I had been so focused on the ruins I hadn't noticed the shadow trailing me. Does Ray own a truck? I tried to remember the vehicle in the parking lot. It was dusty. Was it black? It was too dark to tell. I looked at the time on the bedside alarm clock. The red numbers burned in the dark. 2:12 a.m. The silence of the room was oppressive. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner, a sound that cycled up and down like a breathing lung. I could hear the wind buffeting the glass, and I could hear my own pulse, a wet thump in my ears. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the crack under the door, a thin line of yellow from the hallway bulb. I lay down still, fully clothed, clutching my phone like a weapon. Just close your eyes, just rest for an hour. Then it happened. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't a tentative rap. It was 3 distinct deliberate impacts, solid knuckles against hollow wood. My eyes snapped open. I stopped breathing. The knocks didn't sound like a drunken guest stumbling to the wrong room. They were precise, spaced perfectly apart. 1 second between each strike. Knock, one, knock, one, knock. I stared at the door. The chair was wedged tight. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on. I was safe. I didn't need to answer. "Housekeeping," a voice said. I froze. My blood turned into slush in my veins. It wasn't a man's voice. It wasn't the gravelly voice of Ray the clerk. It was a girl. "Housekeeping. Just need to check the towels real quick." I checked the clock. 2:13 a.m. housekeeping at 2 in the morning. "I didn't request housekeeping," I said. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the room. Silence from the hallway. Then the voice came again. But this time the tone had shifted. It wasn't the rote-bored monotone of a service worker. It was trembling, high-pitched. "Please, open the door. I need to check the towels. It's policy." The logic shattered instantly. No hotel has a towel check policy at 2:00 a.m. This was wrong. This was a glitch in the script. I swung my legs off the bed, moving as silently as I could. I crept toward the door, avoiding the creaky spots in the floorboards that I had mapped out when I first walked in. I reached the door and pressed my ear against the cold wood. I could hear breathing on the other side. Not the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a resting person. It was sharp, shallow, erratic gasps, the sound of someone hyperventilating. "Please," the voice whispered right against the crack of the door. "Please open up." I shouldn't look. Every instinct I had honed from years of exploring dangerous places screamed at me. Stay away from the threshold. The door is the only thing separating your reality from theirs. But curiosity is a disease. I leaned forward. I closed one eye and pressed the other to the peephole. The glass of the peephole was scratched and cloudy, distorting the hallway into a fisheye tunnel of yellow light and brown walls. Standing there was a girl. She looked young, maybe 17 or 18. She was wearing a dirty tank top and denim shorts that were too big for her. Her blonde hair was a matted mess, sticking to her forehead with sweat. Mascara had run down her cheeks in long black rivers, like war paint. She was hugging herself, shivering violently as if she were standing in a blizzard, not the Nevada heat. "Please," she sobbed, looking down at her feet. "My boyfriend. He left me. He took my stuff." It was pathetic. It was heartbreaking. It was exactly what you would expect to see in a nightmare scenario. But then she did something that made the hair on my arms stand up so straight it hurt. She stopped shivering, instantly. She lifted her head and looked straight at the peephole. She couldn't see me. Physics dictated that she couldn't see through the one-way lens, but her eyes, wide blue and terrifyingly clear amidst the smeared makeup, locked directly onto mine. And then she blinked. Her eyelids moved slowly, like the shutter of a camera set to a long exposure. When they opened again, the iris seemed to rotate, slightly adjusting focus. "I know you're in there," she whispered. Her voice didn't sound like it was coming through the door. It sounded like it was originating from inside my own head. "I can hear your heart beating, Morgan." She knew my name. I hadn't told anyone my name except the clerk. I backed away from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The chair wedged under the handle suddenly looked like a toy. The deadbolt looked like a piece of tin. "Open the door, Morgan," the girl said, her voice rising in pitch, cracking into a sob again, switching back to the terrified victim persona in a split second. "Please, I'm so scared. He's coming back. He's going to hurt me." The oscillation between the two tones, the cold, knowing predator and the weeping child, was nauseating. It was auditory uncanny valley. I stared at the door, the wood grain swimming in my vision. I was trapped in a box on the second floor of nowhere, and the thing outside knew exactly who I was. And then, very slowly, the handle began to turn. The metal scraped against the metal. The chair groaned as pressure was applied from the outside. She wasn't just knocking anymore, she was testing the perimeter. I gripped my camera bag, my knuckles turning white. I looked at the window, then back at the door. "Go away!" I shouted, abandoning stealth. "I'm calling the police!" The handle stopped moving. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds there was silence, then a giggle, soft, wet, and childish. "The police," she said through the wood. "But Morgan, who do you think gave me the master key?" I heard the distinct heavy clack of a key sliding into the lock. I watched in horror as the deadbolt knob began to rotate, slowly, inexorably, to the left. Click. The deadbolt retracted. The only thing holding the door now was the chain and the chair. The door creaked open an inch, hitting the chain with a sharp, metallic snap. Through the sliver of space I saw a single blue eye peering in. It wasn't crying anymore. It was crinkled at the edges. She was smiling. "Room service," she whispered. The chain held. It was a small, brass-plated piece of hardware secured to the frame with 4 screws that looked like they had been painted over a dozen times. As the door pushed inward, the chain went taut, snapping straight with a sound like a cracking whip. The gap was no more than 3 inches, enough to see the hallway's peeling wallpaper, enough to let in a draft of air that smelled of ozone and dust, and enough to frame the single blue eye that was staring at me. "Room service," she whispered again. The playfulness in her voice was gone, replaced by a flat, terrifying neutrality. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed my shoulder against the wood, driving my weight into the door. It hit the girl's foot. She had wedged a dirty white sneaker into the gap, but the sudden force made her stumble back. The door banged shut, the latch clicking, but the deadbolt was still retracted. The key was still in the lock on the outside. I scrambled to re-engage the thumb turn of the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat slipping on the metal knob. I twisted it hard to the right. Thud. The bolt slid home. I didn't stop there. I grabbed the heavy desk chair I had used as a barricade, the one that had proven useless against a master key, and shoved it back under the handle this time, jamming the top of the backrest so hard against the knob that the front legs of the chair lifted off the floor. Then I backed away, retreating until my legs hit the edge of the bed. My chest was heaving, my lungs burning as if I'd just sprinted a mile in the desert heat. "Go away!" I screamed. It wasn't the commanded shout of a confident woman. It was the shrill, desperate cry of a cornered animal. "I have a gun! I swear to God I have a gun!" I didn't have a gun. I had a Nikon D850 and a tripod. Heavy, blunt object, sure but useless against a bullet or a blade. Silence fell over the hallway again. I stared at the door, waiting for the sound of the key turning again, waiting for the heavy shoulder of a man to hit the wood, waiting for Ray the clerk with the dead eyes to come finish what he started. But nothing happened. The handle didn't move, the key didn't turn. Instead, I heard a sound that was infinitely worse than aggression. I heard sliding. It was the sound of fabric dragging against the cheap industrial carpet. Then a soft thud. She had slumped down against the door. She was sitting right there on the other side of the wood, her back pressed against my only exit. Then came the sobbing. It wasn't the theatrical, wailing cry she had used before. This was different. It was a low, guttural, keen, a sound of wet, mucus-filled misery. It sounded like a child who had cried themselves into exhaustion and was now just leaking despair. "He's gonna kill me," she mumbled. The words were muffled by the door, but clear enough. "He's gonna kill me, and you're just gonna let him." I stood there paralyzed. My photographer's brain, the part of me trained to observe, to detach, to frame the world in rectangles, began to analyze the audio. Was it a recording? Was it a performance? "Who is going to kill you?" I asked. I hated myself for speaking. I hated that I couldn't just stay silent. "Tyler," she choked out. "And Ray, the guy at the desk, he keeps the keys. He let Tyler in." My stomach twisted. This aligned with my own suspicion. Ray the creep in the lobby. Ray who was staring at my window. "Why are you at my door?" I asked, moving slightly closer but keeping the bed between us. "I saw your light," she said. Her voice hitched. "I saw your car, the Honda. It's a woman's car. I thought a woman would help me. Mom always said, go find a woman." The mention of Mom was a tactical nuke. It bypassed my logic and detonated right in the center of my empathy. I looked at the door. It was a barrier, yes, but it was also a choice. On one side, safety. On the other, a girl who sounded exactly like my younger sister Emily did when she called me after her first heartbreak. "Don't be an idiot, Morgan," I told myself. "This is how Ted Bundy got his victims. He wore a cast. He asked for help." "I can't open the door," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I can call for help. I can yell. I can break the window and shout for the police." "No!" she shrieked. The sudden volume made me jump. "No police, Ray. Ray pays the cops. If they come, they just give me back to him. You don't understand. This isn't a normal town." She began to hyperventilate again. I could hear her nails scratching against the wood of the door, a slow, rhythmic scritch, 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 like a rat trying to burrow through. I just need to call Sarah," she wept. "My friend, she lives in Baker. She has a car. She has a gun. She can come get me, please. He took my phone. He took my shoes." I looked down at the gap under the door. I could see the tip of her sneaker. It was white, battered, and coated in reddish dust. "But wait," she said, "he took her shoes." I squinted. No, she was wearing one shoe. The other foot, visible just at the edge of the frame, was bare. The skin was pale, dirty, and looked raw, as if she'd been walking on asphalt. A glitch in the lie, or a detail of the truth. "I'll pass you my phone," I said. "I'll slide it under the door." "It won't fit," she said immediately. "The gap is too small and my hands." He stepped on my hands. I can't hold it good if I'm lying down." Logic war, point one. The gap was small. The gap. My iPhone and its OtterBox case probably wouldn't slide through. Point two. Stepped on her hands. That explained the clumsiness with the key earlier. Maybe counterpoint. She turned the handle just fine. "You turned the handle," I said. "Your hands work fine." "Adrenaline," she whispered. "It's wearing off. It hurts so bad. Please, just let me in for a minute. I'll sit by the door. I won't come in. Just let me use the phone and I'll leave. I swear on my life. I swear on my soul." The silence stretched. The wind outside howled, rattling the window pane, a lonely, desolate sound that emphasized just how far away from civilization we were. I looked at the peephole again. I couldn't see her face anymore because she was slumped on the floor. I could only see the empty hallway. If I didn't open the door and she was telling the truth, if Ray came up those stairs, if I heard her scream and the dull thud of a pipe hitting bone and I did nothing, I could never live with that. I documented abandoned places because I was fascinated by what people left behind. I couldn't be the person who left a person behind. "Okay," I said. The word tasted like ash. "Okay, listen to me. I am going to open the door, but I am holding a heavy metal tripod. If you try anything at all, I will swing it and I won't stop swinging." "Okay," she sobbed. "Okay, thank you. Oh, God, thank you." I grabbed my Manfrotto tripod. It was solid aluminum, heavy enough to crack a skull. I collapsed the leg so it was a baton. I held it in my right hand, my finger on the latch of the deadbolt with my left. "Move back," I commanded. "Move away from the door so I can push it open." I heard the shuffling sound again. The shadow under the door receded. "I'm back," she said. "I'm sitting against the wall opposite." I took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. I pulled the chair away. The scraping sound was excruciatingly loud. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I undid the chain. Clatter. I gripped the door handle. It felt cold and greasy. I turned it and pushed. The door swung open. The hallway was bathed in that flickering amber light. And there she was. She was sitting on the floor, back against the peeling wallpaper of the opposite wall, knees pulled to her chest. She looked smaller than she had through the peephole. Frailer. She looked up at me. Her face was a ruin of makeup and tears. Her lower lip was split and bleeding. There was a bruise forming on her left cheekbone, blooming like a dark purple flower under the translucent skin, and she was trembling. Not a fake movie shake, a genuine biological tremor that rattled her bones. "Thank you," she whispered. She tried to stand up, but stumbled, her bare foot slipping on the carpet. She winced, grabbing her ankle. My aggression evaporated. The tripod lowered slightly. This wasn't a monster. This was a broken kid. "Get in," I said, my voice harsh but wavering. "Quickly." She hobbled into the room. She smelled of sagebrush sweat and something else. Vanilla. No, it was sweeter, like rotting lilies. It was faint, buried under the body odor, but it was there. I slammed the door shut behind her. Deadbolt, chain, chair. I did it all in under 5 seconds. When I turned around, she was standing in the middle of the room. She hadn't moved further in. She was hugging herself, looking at the floor. "You're safe," I said, though I didn't feel safe. "Here." I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag, warm, plastic-tasting water, and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick, the skin around them raw and red. She didn't drink it. She just held it like a talisman. "The phone," she said. "Please." "Sit down." I gestured to the ugly floral armchair in the corner. "Sit." She sat. She moved with a strange fluidity for someone who was supposedly injured. She didn't plop down. She lowered herself, her spine straight, her head tilting slightly to the side. It reminded me of a bird perching on a wire. Watchful. I kept the tripod in my hand. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "What's the number?" I asked. "I'll dial it." She rattled off a number. Area code 702, Las Vegas. I typed it in and hit the green button. I put it on speaker. Ring, ring, ring. "Hello," a female voice answered, groggy, annoyed. "Sarah?" The girl in my room lunged forward slightly, then checked herself. "Sarah, it's me. It's Tess." "Tess!" The voice on the phone woke up instantly. "Oh my God! Where are you? We've been looking everywhere. Did he hurt you?" "I'm okay. I got away. He kicked me out at a motel, the Sunset, on Highway 76. "I know where that is," Sarah said. "I can be there in 40 minutes, maybe 30 if I speed. Are you safe? Are you alone?" Tess looked at me. Her eyes were blue, so blue. But in the fluorescent light of the room they looked flat. Matte paint instead of glass. "No," Tess said. "I'm not alone. A lady let me in." A lady, Sarah asked. Is she cool? Yeah, Tess said. She took a breath, a long, shuddering inhalation that didn't seem to have an exhalation to match. She's nice. She kept her eyes on mine. Describe her, Sarah said. The request was odd. Why would a friend need a description of the Samaritan maybe to identify me when she arrived? To thank me, Tess smiled. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a muscle contraction. Her lips pulled back horizontally, exposing teeth that were too white, too straight, too perfect for a runaway living in the desert. She's blonde, Tess said into the phone, her voice dropping an octave. It lost the tremor. It lost the fear. It became smooth, analytical, professional. Height 5'7", weight approximately 130. Athletic build. My blood froze. The water bottle fell from her hand, hitting the carpet with a dull thud, but she didn't react. She didn't flinch. Wait, I said, taking a step back. What are you doing? Tess ignored me. She continued talking to the phone, her eyes dissecting me. She has equipment, Tess continued. Canon and Nikon gear, laptop, cash on hand, and the car, Honda Civic. Broken radiator, but the chassis is good. Easy fix. No, I whispered. The word fell out of my mouth like a stone. This wasn't a rescue call. This was an appraisal. Tess? Sarah's voice on the speakerphone changed, too. It wasn't a worried friend anymore. It was a man's voice, deep, distorted, and cruel. Ask her about the eyes. We need good corneas. The last batch was cloudy. I lunged for the phone. Tess moved. She didn't stand up like a human. She uncoiled. One moment she was sitting in the chair. The next she was standing 3 feet away, just out of my reach. It was impossibly fast, a blur of motion that my brain couldn't process. She was holding my phone. She had snatched it from my hand before I even registered the movement. Blue, Tess said into the phone, her gaze locking onto my irises. Pale blue, very clear, no astigmatism visible, prime quality. Give me my phone, I shouted, raising the tripod. Panic was rising in my throat, a sour bile. Get out, or I'll kill you, Tess laughed. It wasn't the girlish giggle from earlier. It was a dry, rasping sound like sandpaper rubbing together. She tilted her head all the way to the right until her ear almost touched her shoulder. A crack sounded from her neck loud as a pistol shot. You can't kill what's already hollow, Morgan, she said. She walked backward toward the window. She didn't look where she was going. She kept her eyes glued to me. She reached behind her and grabbed the curtain. 10 minutes, the man on the phone said. Keep her fresh. Don't damage the face. We get docked for bruising. Understood, Tess said. She threw the phone. She didn't throw it at me. She threw it hard against the wall above the bed. Crack. The screen shattered. The phone fell to the mattress, the light flickering and dying. The connection was severed, but the silence that followed was louder than the voice. Why? I gasped, clutching the tripod with both hands, stepping back until my legs hit the dresser. I helped you. I opened the door. Tess stood by the window. The light from the bedside lamp cast long, distorted shadows across her face. That's the problem with you people, she said. Her voice was calm now, conversational. You think empathy is a virtue. It's not. It's a biological flaw, a crack in the armor. She reached up and wiped the mascara from her cheek with the back of her hand. She pressed hard, smearing the black ink across her skin. We love the ones with the savior complex, she mused. They're the easiest. They basically pluck themselves. She turned to the window and ripped the curtains open. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass. And then floodlights. 3 pairs of high beams snapped on in the parking lot below. Blinding white light flooded the room, washing out the colors, turning everything into high-contrast monochrome. The light was so intense I had to shield my eyes. I heard car doors slamming. 1, 2, 3, heavy boots hitting the gravel. They're here, Tess said, turning back to me. She was outlined in silhouette against the blinding light, a black void in the shape of a girl. And they are very hungry. I ran for the door. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the chair I had wedged there, my foolish, useless barricade, and yanked it away. I reached for the deadbolt. Click. I turned the handle. Locked. I twisted it again. Locked. "The key," Tess said from behind me. "You forgot the key is on the outside Morgan." I heard the jingle of metal from the hallway. Someone was on the other side. "Room service," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled through the door. It was Ray. I backed away, trapped. Tess pulled something from the waistband of her denim shorts. It was a knife, but it wasn't a normal knife. It was a curved blade, rusted and jagged, the handle wrapped in dirty leather cord. It looked like a ritual tool. "Don't worry," she said, stepping toward me. The light from outside caught the edge of the blade. "We don't waste anything. Your hair will make beautiful wigs. Your skin, well, leather is always in high demand." She lunged. I swung the tripod. It was a clumsy, desperate swing. The aluminum leg caught her on the shoulder. It should have broken her collarbone. I felt the impact vibrate up my arms, but Tess didn't scream. She didn't fall. She just absorbed the blow, stumbling back a step. She looked at her shoulder, then back at me. She smiled. "Is that all you got, photographer?" The door handle behind me began to rattle violently. Ray was trying to force the lock, or maybe he was just playing with me. Bang, 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 fists pounded on the door. "Open up, little piggy," Ray shouted. "Dinner time." I was caught between the hammer and the anvil. The girl with the impossible durability in front of me, and the men who wanted to harvest me behind me. I looked at the bathroom door. It was flimsy, hollow core wood, but it had a lock. And inside there was a ventilation window. High up, small, but I was small. Tess saw my eyes flick to the bathroom. "Don't even think about it," she hissed. She slashed the air with the knife. I threw the tripod at her. It was a distraction, a heavy, clumsy projectile. She swatted it away like it was a fly, the metal clanging against the wall. But in that split second, I turned and sprinted. I dove into the bathroom, slamming the door just as her knife buried itself in the wood, the tip punching through the plyboard inches from my face. I engaged the lock. It was a pitiful little push-button lock. It wouldn't hold them for more than 10 seconds. I heard Tess shriek on the other side, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a cougar, high and tearing. Then the body slams began. Thud. The door bowed inward. I spun around. The bathroom was tiny. A sink, a toilet, a shower, and above the toilet, high up on the wall, was the window. It was frosted glass encased in a rusted metal frame, maybe 14 inches wide. I climbed onto the toilet tank. The porcelain lid cracked under my boots. I grabbed the handle of the window, rusted shut. "Come on!" I screamed, slamming the heel of my hand against the frame. Behind me, the bathroom door splintered. A hand reached through the hole Tess had made with her knife. It was groping for the lock. "I see you." Tess giggled from the other side. "I see your pretty little legs." I grabbed the shower curtain rod, a tension rod, and ripped it down. I used the metal end like a battering ram, smashing it into the window glass. Crash! The glass shattered outward, raining down into the darkness behind the motel. The hole was jagged, lined with teeth of broken glass. I didn't care. The bathroom door gave way with a deafening crack. Tess burst in Ray right behind her, filling the small doorway with their bulk. Tess lunged for my ankle, her fingers cold and hard as iron claws grazed my boot. "Going somewhere?" she snarled. I kicked backward, my heel connected with her face. I felt cartilage crunch. She didn't let go. She grabbed my laces. I pulled myself up, ignoring the glass slicing into my palms, ignoring the agony in my arms. I scrabbled through the window frame. My shirt caught on a shard of glass. I heard fabric tearing, then skin tearing. A line of fire erupted across my ribs. "Get her legs!" Ray roared. I pulled my legs through, kicking wildly. My boot came off in Tess's hand. I tumbled out into the cool night air. I fell. It wasn't a long drop, maybe 10 feet, but I landed hard. I hit a bush, the dry branches whipping my face before rolling onto the sandy ground. The wind knocked out of me. I looked up. Tess was leaning out of the broken window. Her face was a mask of blood from where I had kicked her, but she wasn't wiping it away. She was licking it. "Run, rabbit!" she screamed into the night, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Run, it makes the meat sweeter." I scrambled to my feet, clutching my bleeding side, and ran into the desert darkness. I didn't look back at the lights. I didn't look back at the car I was leaving behind. I just ran toward the silence, hoping that the silence wasn't hungry too. The desert night was not silent. That is a myth told by people who view the wilderness through the safety of a television screen. The desert night was a cacophony of small, terrifying sounds magnified by the isolation. The wind hissed through the sagebrush like 1,000 snakes. The sand shifted underfoot with a sound like grinding bones, and behind me the mechanical roar of the pickup truck tore through the atmosphere, a man-made predator announcing its hunger. I ran. My body had engaged a gear I didn't know existed. It wasn't the rhythmic jogging of my morning cardio in Seattle, nor the controlled hiking of my urban exploration trips. This was primal, chaotic flight. It was a series of controlled falls, my legs pumping not out of strength, but out of a desperate refusal to die. I was missing my left boot. The sock had already shredded against the abrasive texture of the desert floor. Every step was a fresh equation of pain. The sand was cool but hidden. Within it were the terrors of the Mojave floor, jagged rocks, dried scorpion husks, and the fallen needles of cholla cactus. I felt a sharp, stinging puncture in my arch, a needle buried deep, but my brain deprioritized the signal. Pain was information for later. Survival was the only metric that mattered now. "Lisa!" The voice boomed from the darkness behind me. It wasn't Ray. It wasn't Tess. It was a man's voice amplified by a megaphone. "Lisa, honey, you're making this difficult. We just want to finish the transaction." They were using the fake name. The name Tess had given them. It was a psychological barb, a reminder that to them I wasn't Morgan Cade photographer. I was inventory item #237. I threw myself into a shallow ravine, a dry wash carved by flash floods decades ago. The drop was steeper than I anticipated. I tumbled down the sandy bank, my shoulder, the one I had used to ram the door, slamming into a protruding root. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming, the copper taste of blood filling my mouth. I scrambled to the bottom and pressed myself against the cut bank, trying to merge with the shadows. Above me on the ridge, the darkness was sliced open by twin beams of blinding white light. The truck. It was prowling along the edge of the wash, its suspension groaning as it navigated the uneven terrain. The light swept over my head, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air, turning the sagebrush into skeletal, grasping hands. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was terrified they could hear it. Thump, 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 thump. It felt like a drum solo in an empty concert hall. The truck stopped. The engine idled, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground and into my spine. "Cut the engine," a voice hissed from above. The lights died. The engine cut out. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise. It fell over the desert like a lead blanket. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening. Crunch, boots on gravel. Crunch. "She went into the wash," a voice said. It was smooth, cultured. It sounded like a banker or a university professor. This must be one of the buyers. I saw the dust cloud. "She's bleeding," Ray's gravelly voice replied. "Tess got a piece of her. Follow the blood." "No lights," the cultured voice commanded. "Use the thermal. We paid 30 grand for the optics. I want to use them." Thermal. My blood ran cold. Darkness was my only ally, and technology had just stripped it away. If they had thermal imaging, I wasn't a person hiding in the dark. I was a glowing red beacon of heat against a backdrop of cold blue sand. I had to move. I couldn't stay static. The thermal scope would pick up my body heat instantly if they had a line of sight. I needed cover that would mask my temperature. I looked around the wash. It was a river of dry sand and rocks. But about 50 yards down I saw a shape. A large, gnarled mesquite tree, its roots exposed by erosion, creating a small cavern underneath the bank. The wood would be dense, retaining some of the day's heat, potentially camouflaging my own signature. I began to crawl. I moved on my hands and knees, keeping my profile low. The sand flayed the skin off my palms. My left foot was a throbbing lump of agony. Every inch was a battle against the urge to vomit from fear. Scuff! I froze. The sound came from inside the wash, not from the ridge above. Someone else was down here with me. I turned my head slowly, my neck muscles screaming in protest. About 20 feet behind me, standing in the center of the dry riverbed, was a silhouette. It was small, slender. Tess. She wasn't using a flashlight. She wasn't using thermal goggles. She was standing perfectly still, her head cocked to the side, listening. "Morgan," she whispered. The sound didn't carry like a normal whisper. It seemed to ride the wind, arriving at my ear with terrifying clarity. "I can smell you, Morgan. You smell like fear and expensive shampoo." She took a step forward. She was barefoot, moving over the sharp rocks with the grace of a phantom. She didn't wince. She didn't stumble. "You broke my nose," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of pain and excitement. "Daddy isn't going to like that. He likes the merchandise pristine, but me, I like it when they fight. It makes the meat tender." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the ground, tracking the disturbances in the sand. She was hunting like an animal. I realized with a jolt of horror that the mimic behavior wasn't just a metaphor. She was moving her head in jerky, bird-like motions, triangulating sound. I reached down and grabbed a rock. It was the size of a grapefruit, heavy and jagged. I couldn't outrun her. Not with my foot like this, not in her element. If she signaled the men on the ridge, it was over. I had to take her out. I waited. I stopped breathing. I became a stone. Tess took another step. She was 10 feet away. Come out," she sang, the melody stolen from a nursery rhyme but twisted into a funeral dirge. "Sarah is waiting. Sarah wants to meet you." She pivoted. Her head snapped toward my location. Even in the dark, I felt the weight of that one-eyed gaze. "Found you." She lunged. She didn't run. She launched herself like a spider. I didn't hesitate. I threw the rock. It wasn't a calculated pitch. It was a frantic heave of desperation. Crack! The rock struck her in the chest. It was a solid hit, enough to break ribs. Tess let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a hiss, a high-pressure release of air like a tire blowing out. She stumbled back, falling onto her rear in the sand. "Bitch!" she shrieked. The voice was suddenly human again, thick with pain. "She's here. She's in the wash. Light her up." "Yeah," Ray yelled from the ridge. A flare gun popped. A streak of red fire arched into the sky, hissing as it climbed. Then it burst. The wash was bathed in a hellish crimson light. The shadows danced and elongated, turning the desert into a landscape of blood. I scrambled up the opposite bank of the wash, ignoring the pain in my foot. The adrenaline had turned into a blinding white noise in my brain. Run, just run. I crested the ridge and saw them. There were 3 men standing by the truck. They weren't wearing tactical gear. They weren't wearing ski masks. They were wearing suits. Expensive tailored suits that looked grotesque against the backdrop of the dirty desert. And on their faces were masks. One wore the head of a rabbit, a white fuzzy mascot mask that was stained yellow with age, the ears lopped to one side. One wore the head of a bear, a realistic taxidermied bear head that had been hollowed out, its glass eyes gleaming under the red flare light. And the third, the one holding the thermal scope, wore the head of a wolf, a silver wolf with bared teeth. It wasn't a trafficking ring. It was a cult. It was a ritual. "There she is," the wolf said, pointing a gloved finger at me. "The runner." "Release the dogs," the rabbit asked, his voice muffled by the mask. "No," the wolf said. He lowered the scope and picked up a compound bow from the bed of the truck. "This one is mine. The hunt requires a tribute of blood." He knocked an arrow. I didn't wait to see him draw. I threw myself sideways, rolling behind a cluster of boulders, just as a razor-tipped arrow shattered against the rock face where my head had been a second ago. Sing. The sound of the arrow striking stone was sharp and final. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted into the darkness away from the wash. The flare was drifting down the light, fading, returning the desert to its suffocating blackness. I ran toward a structure I saw in the distance, a silhouette of jagged metal and collapsed wood. It looked like an old mining ruin or a squatter's shack. "She's heading for the Boneyard," Ray's voice echoed. "Cut her off with the truck." The engine roared to life again. I pushed my body beyond its limits. My lungs burned as if I were inhaling broken glass. My bare foot was numb, which was bad. It meant the nerve endings were overloaded or severed. I reached the structure. It was a graveyard of cars, dozens of them, rusted husks of sedans, trucks, and vans piled in chaotic stacks or half buried in the sand. It was a metal labyrinth. This was where they hid the evidence. This was why no one ever found the missing women. They didn't just bury the bodies, they buried the vehicles. I squeezed between two rusted sedans, a '90s Ford Taurus, and a Chevy pickup. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. I moved deeper into the maze, hoping the metal mass would confuse the thermal scope. I stopped in the center of the wreckage, leaning against a crushed van to catch my breath. I slid down to the ground, pulling my knees to my chest. I needed a weapon, a real one. I felt around in the dirt, glass shards, old beer cans, a rusted muffler. My hand brushed against something soft, leather. I pulled it closer. It was a purse, a Gucci handbag, covered in dust but otherwise intact. I unzipped it. Inside, a wallet, a lipstick, a set of keys, and a driver's license. Jennifer Lopez, not the singer, obviously. Age 24, California. I looked around. There were other items scattered in the dirt between the cars. A high-heel shoe, a sun hat, a child's teddy bear. This wasn't just a dumping ground for cars. It was a trophy garden. They kept the personal effects here. A wave of nausea hit me. I wasn't the first runner. I was just the latest participant in their game. "Morgan." The voice came from right above me. I looked up. Standing on top of the crushed van, silhouetted against the stars, was Tess. She was crouching, looking down at me like a gargoyle. Blood was streaming from her nose, running over her lips and dripping off her chin. "You're good," she whispered. "Better than the last one." She just cried and curled up in a ball. She hopped down. She landed silently in the dirt 5 feet away from me. In her hand she held the curved knife. "But the game has a time limit," she said, "and the wolf gets impatient." I stood up. I backed away until my spine hit the sharp metal edge of a car door. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. My voice was a rasp. "You're a girl. You're human. How can you do this to other women?" Tess tilted her head. She wiped the blood from her mouth and licked her fingers. "Human," she mused. "That's a strong word. I was human once. When I was 12. When Ray found me." She took a step closer. "But then they showed me the truth, Morgan. The world is divided into two groups, the eaters and the eaten. You can be the cattle or you can be the butcher. I chose the knife." She raised the blade, "And besides," she giggled, the sound echoing off the rusted metal, "it's fun." She lunged. This time I was ready, or at least I was desperate enough. I didn't dodge away. I dropped. I fell to my knees, dodging the slash that was aimed at my throat. The knife sparked against the car door behind me. I grabbed a handful of desert sand mixed with glass shards and rust flakes and threw it upward straight into her eyes. "Gotch!" Tess screamed, clawing at her face. I didn't stop. I lunged forward, tackling her around the waist. We hit the dirt hard. She was surprisingly strong, her body wired and tense like a coiled spring. She thrashed, screaming, trying to bring the knife down. I grabbed her wrist. Her skin was cold clammy. We rolled in the dust of the Boneyard. The teddy bear I'd seen earlier was crushed under us. "Let go!" she shrieked. She bit my arm. Her teeth sank deep into my forearm. I screamed in pain, but I didn't let go of her knife hand. I slammed her wrist against a rock, once, twice. The knife flew from her grip. I scrambled for it. She grabbed my hair. She yanked my head back so hard I felt my neck pop. "I'm going to peel you," she screamed directly into my ear. "I'm going to wear your face." I reached out blindly. My fingers closed around something metal. Not the knife. It was a rusted tire iron half buried in the sand. I swung it backward over my shoulder with every ounce of strength I had left. Thwack! The iron bar connected with her skull. Her grip on my hair instantly slackened. I scrambled away, crawling on my back, the tire iron held up like a shield. Tess was lying on the ground. She wasn't moving. A dark pool was spreading under her head. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Was she dead? I hoped so. God help me, I hoped so. Vroom! The truck. Headlights swept across the tops of the junked cars. They had found the Boneyard. "She's in the stack!" the wolf's voice shouted. "I see fresh tracks!" I scrambled to my feet. I looked at Tess. Her chest was rising and falling shallowly. Unconscious, I looked at the tire iron in my hand. Then I looked at the knife lying in the dirt. I dropped the tire iron and picked up the knife. It felt heavy balanced, a tool for killing. I checked my pockets, the keys. I had seen keys in the purse. I dove back to the Gucci bag. I grabbed the keychain. It was a Honda key fob, not for my car. For Jennifer Lopez's car. Where was her car? I scanned the immediate area. A silver Honda Accord was crushed under a heavy truck nearby. Useless. I looked at the keys again. There was a second key. A Ford key. I looked around. A blue Ford Focus sat near the edge of the stack. It looked relatively intact, though the windshield was cracked. "Flush her out," Ray yelled. "Burn it if you have to." I smelled gasoline. They were going to torch the Boneyard. I sprinted toward the Ford Focus. I didn't care about stealth anymore. I smashed the driver's side window with the hilt of the knife. I unlocked the door and threw myself inside. "Please start. Please, Jennifer, have a working battery." I jammed the key into the ignition. I turned it. Click, click, click. Dead battery. "No!" I screamed, slamming my hands against the steering wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror. A figure was standing at the entrance of the car maze. It was the wolf. He was holding a jerry can in one hand and a flare in the other. He saw me. The silver mask glinted in the starlight. He tilted his head, mimicking a curious dog. "Found you," he said. He uncapped the jerry can and began to splash gasoline onto the dry brush in the nearest car. Then he lit the flare. "Fire in the hole." He tossed the flare. The gasoline ignited with a whoosh. A wall of fire erupted, instantly fueled by the dry desert air and the leaking oil of the junked cars. The heat was instantaneous. It rolled over the Ford Focus in a wave. I was trapped in a metal box in a maze of metal that was rapidly turning into an oven. I looked at the passenger seat. There was a glove box. I opened it. A gun. A small, snub-nosed .38 revolver. Jennifer had been prepared. She just hadn't been fast enough. I grabbed the gun. I checked the cylinder. 5 shots. I kicked the passenger door open. The fire was blocking the main exit. The wolf was standing there, watching the flames with a sick reverence. I couldn't go forward. I looked back. The only way out was deeper into the desert, toward the cliffs. I rolled out of the car just as the flames licked the tires. I ran. I ran past the burning cars. The smoke was thick, black, and oily. It choked me, blinding me. I emerged from the back of the Boneyard, coughing, my eyes streaming tears. I was out of the maze, but I was in the open. And in front of me, standing by the edge of a deep ravine, was the bear. The man in the bear mask. He was huge. He held a cattle prod that sparked with blue electricity in the night. He blocked my path. "End of the line, Morgan," he grunted. I raised the gun. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. "Move!" I screamed. The bear laughed, a deep resonant sound inside the hollow mask. "You won't shoot. You're a tourist. You take pictures. You don't take lives." He took a step forward, the cattle prod buzzing angrily. "Let's see how much voltage you can take before you pop." I didn't think. I didn't weigh the moral consequences. I thought about Tess and her knife. I thought about the pile of shoes. I thought about the fire consuming Jennifer's car. I pulled the trigger. Bang! The recoil nearly tore the gun from my sweaty grip. The flash blinded me for a second. The bear stopped. He looked down at his chest. A small dark hole had appeared in the center of his expensive suit, right through the sternum. He looked back at me. The glass eyes of the bear mask seemed to widen in surprise. "Oh," he said. He crumpled. He fell forward, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The cattle prod fell from his hand, sparking against a rock before dying out. I stood there, the gun smoking in my hand. The ringing in my ears was deafening. I had killed a man. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, hollow horror, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, the boneyard was an inferno. The flames were 50 feet high, lighting up the desert like daylight. I heard Ray screaming. I heard the wolf shouting orders. "She has a gun, take cover, get the rifles." I turned and ran toward the ravine. It was a sheer drop into darkness. I couldn't see the bottom, but on the other side, about 20 feet across, was a rocky outcrop, and beyond that, the highway. I could see the faint headlights of a semi-truck passing in the extreme distance. Civilization. I looked down at the drop, then back at the fire and the approaching flashlights of the hunters. There was no bridge, but there was a pipe, an old rusted water pipe spanning the gap. It was maybe a foot wide. "There she is," the wolf yelled. He had climbed onto the roof of a car, aiming his bow. An arrow whizzed past my ear, slicing a lock of my hair. I stepped onto the pipe. It groaned. Rust flakes fell into the abyss. "Don't look down," I whispered to myself. "Don't look down." I began to walk across the void, balancing on a century of rust, while the devil aimed his arrows at my back, and the fires of hell burned behind me. This was the only way home, and if I fell, well, at least I wouldn't end up in the boneyard. I took another step. The pipe shifted. I was halfway across when I heard the sound that stopped my heart. The pipe wasn't just old, it was broken. Crack! The metal beneath my feet gave way. I fell. My hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the broken pipe as my body swung into the empty air over the canyon. The gun slipped from my fingers and tumbled into the dark. I hung there one-handed, my muscles tearing my feet, dangling over nothing. Above me, the wolf stepped to the edge of the ravine. He looked down at me. The firelight reflected in his silver mask. He knocked another arrow. He aimed it straight at my face. "Good game, Morgan," he said. He drew the string back. I closed my eyes. Bang! A gunshot rang out. But it didn't come from me, and it didn't come from the hunters. It came from the highway side of the ravine. The wolf jerked. The arrow flew wide, hitting the canyon wall. He clutched his shoulders, staggering back. I looked across the gap. Standing on the rocky outcrop illuminated by the firelight was a figure. It wasn't a cop. It was a woman. She was holding a hunting rifle. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the canyon. "Leave her alone!" It was the impossible twist, a variable no one had calculated. The wolf looked at the woman, then at me. He looked at his bleeding shoulder. He spat at me. "Next time," he snarled. He turned and ran back into the smoke. I hung there, swinging in the wind. "Hold on," the woman shouted. "I'm tossing a rope." I looked up at the stars. They were indifferent, cold, and beautiful. I was alive, for now. But as I pulled myself up, straining against gravity, I realized something. I had left my camera in room 237, my camera with the photos of the truck, with the evidence. I was alive, but they still had my life. And Tess was still somewhere in the dark with a headache and a hunger that hadn't been fed. I pulled myself onto the rocky ledge and collapsed. The stranger stood over me. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I looked up. She was an older woman, maybe 60, tough, weather-beaten face. "Who are you?" I croaked. "I'm the one who hears the screaming," she said grimly. "I live 5 miles downwind. Tonight I decided I'd heard enough." She helped me stand. "Come on," she said. "My truck's just up the road. Let's get you to the sheriff." I limped beside her, leaving a trail of blood on the rocks. I looked back at the burning boneyard one last time. The fire formed a shape in the smoke. It looked like a smiling face. The game wasn't over. It had just changed levels. "Don't trust the sheriff," I whispered to the woman. She stopped. She looked at me. "I know," she said. "That's why we're going to the Stadies." We walked into the dark, 2 women against the desert night. and somewhere behind us in the ashes a girl with one shoe and blue eyes began to laugh. The ride to the county line was the longest hour of my life. The woman who saved me was named Martha. She drove an old Ford F-150 that smelled of wet dog and stale tobacco. I sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket she had pulled from behind the seat, clutching a bottle of lukewarm water. My body was vibrating a continuous low-frequency tremor that rattled my teeth. It was the adrenaline crash. The chemical cocktail that had allowed me to jump across a ravine and kill a man was draining away, leaving behind a husk of raw nerves and screaming pain. "You're bleeding on my upholstery," Martha said. Her voice wasn't unkind, just factual. She kept her eyes on the road, watching for headlights in the rearview mirror. "I'll pay for the cleaning," I whispered. My throat felt like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. "I'll buy you a new truck." "Don't worry about it," she grunted. "Blood washes out, guilt doesn't." She didn't ask what I'd done back there. She didn't ask why the desert was burning or why a man in a bear mask was lying dead in the dirt. She drove with the grim determination of a woman who had seen the desert swallow things before and knew better than to ask the desert for an explanation. We bypassed the local sheriff's station. Martha knew the score. "Sheriff Miller plays poker with Ray every Tuesday," she had said when I reached for the door handle. "If we go there, you never leave that cell." Instead, we drove to the state trooper outpost in Beatty. The lights of the station were harsh, sterile, and blue, the color of safety, or at least the color of bureaucracy. When I walked in barefoot, covered in soot, dried blood, and gasoline, the officer at the desk didn't even ask for ID. He just hit the panic button under the desk and reached for his radio. The next 12 hours were a blur of flashlights, questions, and antiseptic swipes. A tactical team was dispatched to the Sunset Motel within 40 minutes. They found the fire still raging in the Boneyard. They found the body of the man in the bear mask, identified later as a senior partner at a law firm in San Diego. They found Ray, the clerk, trying to shred documents in the back office. He didn't fight. He just smiled, that wet, toothy smile, and asked for a lawyer. But the real horror wasn't what they found in the fire. It was what they found in room 237. Detective Holloway, a grim-faced woman with eyes that had seen too much, sat me down in an interrogation room 3 days later. I had been discharged from the hospital, my foot stitched up, my ribs taped. "You were right about the room," Holloway said, sliding a manila folder across the metal table. "It wasn't a guest room." I opened the folder. The photos were glossy, high resolution. They showed room 237 stripped bare. Behind the floral wallpaper there was soundproofing foam 4 inches thick. The carpet had been pulled up to reveal a concrete floor with a central drain stained dark with years of use. Hidden in the smoke detector, the mirror, and even the hollowed-out Bible in the nightstand were micro cameras, all hardwired to a server in the basement. "They were broadcasting it," Holloway said softly. "Live to a private network. High-paying clients who wanted to see the hunt." I felt the bile rise in my throat. The girl hadn't just been a lure, she was the star. The hunt I had survived wasn't an anomaly, it was the season finale. "And the girl?" I asked. Jessica." Holloway sighed, closing the folder. "We found the wig. We found the contact lenses, blue theatrical grade. We found the bloody knife in the Boneyard." "But did you find her?" "No," Holloway said. "Ray isn't talking. The other 2 men we caught, the ones in the truck, they're terrified. They say they don't know her real name. They just call her the actress. They say she isn't part of the management. She's a contractor." "A contractor?" "I left Nevada the next day. I didn't wait for the trial." I gave my deposition, identified Ray, and the photos of the wolf, who turned out to be a tech CEO from Silicon Valley, still at large, and got on the first flight to Seattle. I thought distance would help. I thought the rain and the gray skies of the Pacific Northwest would wash the desert dust out of my pores. I was wrong. Trauma doesn't adhere to geography. It lives in the quiet moments. It lives in the space between heartbeats. For the first month, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I installed 4 deadbolts on my apartment door. I bought a gun, a Glock 19, and slept with it under my pillow. I stopped taking photos. The idea of looking through a lens, of focusing on a specific point while the rest of the world blurred out, terrified me. I needed to see everything. I needed peripheral vision. I jumped at loud noises. A car backfiring sounded like a gunshot. A child crying in the supermarket sounded like Tess. I obsessively checked the news. The story had broken nationally. The Sunset Motel murders. They found remains of 12 women in the Boneyard. Jennifer Lopez's car was identified. Her parents gave a press conference that broke my heart. I was hailed as a survivor, a hero who exposed a ring of monsters. But I knew the truth. I wasn't a hero. I was just the one who ran the fastest. 3 months passed. The nightmares began to lose their jagged edges, becoming dull, repetitive loops of running through sand that turned into glass. I started to think, maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. Then the package arrived. It was a Tuesday, a rainy, nondescript Tuesday in November. I buzzed the courier up. He left a small cardboard box outside my door. No return address, just my name and address printed in a generic sans serif font. I brought it inside. I put it on the kitchen table. I stared at it for an hour. My gut, that same instinct that had screamed at me in the motel lobby, was screaming now. Don't open it. But curiosity, as always, is the architect of our own destruction. I used a steak knife to slit the tape. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a plastic object. It was my phone case. The cheap, clear plastic case with the sticker of a cat on it. The one Tess had thrown against the wall in room 237. My phone wasn't inside, just the case. And a note. It wasn't written on paper. It was written on the back of a photograph. I picked up the photo. It was a picture of me, but it wasn't taken in Nevada. It was taken here, in Seattle. The photo showed me standing on my balcony, holding a mug of coffee, staring out at the rain. I was wearing the gray sweater I had bought 2 days ago. This picture was taken yesterday. My hands began to shake so violently the photo fluttered like a dying moth. I turned it over. The handwriting was elegant looping script. It looked like the handwriting of a straight-A student or a diligent secretary. You broke the camera, Morgan. But don't worry. We upgraded the lens. Season 2 starts now. I dropped the photo. My new phone buzzed on the table. A text message. Unknown number. I didn't want to look. I wanted to run. I wanted to find Martha and her truck and drive until the wheels fell off. But I looked. It was a video file. I pressed play. The video was shaky shot from a low angle, maybe from a camera hidden in a button or a bag. It showed a hallway, a beige peeling hallway. The camera moved forward. It stopped at a door, room 239. A hand reached into the frame and knocked. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Housekeeping, a voice whispered. It was my voice. No. It was a recording of my voice, a recording of me screaming housekeeping or something similar. No. It was Tess, mimicking me, perfectly. She had stolen my cadence, my pitch, my terror. The door in the video opened. A young woman stood there looking confused. She was wearing headphones. I didn't order housekeeping, the woman said. The camera tilted up. Tess's face came into frame. She wasn't wearing the dirty makeup anymore. She was clean. Her hair was dyed black. She was wearing a crisp gray janitor's uniform. But the eyes were the same. Those flat, blue, dead eyes. She smiled at the camera, breaking the fourth wall. She winked. Then she looked back at the woman in the doorway. "Hotel policy, ma'am?" Tess said, using my voice, the voice I used when I was trying to be polite. "Just need to check the smoke detector. Won't take a minute." The woman in the video hesitated. Then she stepped back. "Okay," the woman said. "Come in." The video cut to black. I sat in my kitchen, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me like water. I realized then that I hadn't escaped. You don't escape the food chain. You just move to a different grazing pasture. I looked at the 4 deadbolts on my door. They looked flimsy. They looked like toys. The wolf was still out there. The actress was still out there. And now they weren't just hunting random travelers. They were hunting me. I stood up and walked to the window. The street below was dark, slick with rain. A black sedan was parked across the street. The engine was idling. I turned off the lights in my apartment. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, the Glock heavy in my hand. I am not a photographer anymore. I am not a survivor. I am bait. And the only thing I can do now is wait for the knock. If you are listening to this and you are alone in a hotel room, check the mirror, check the vent, and for the love of God, if you hear a knocking at 2:00 a.m., do not answer, even if it sounds like a child, even if it sounds like me, because the next time the door opens, it might not be a rescue, it might be the season premiere.